So honored to be joined by a pioneer in sports journalism, the author and editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, the one and only Dave Meltzer. Dave, there's been some absolutely huge news across the pro wrestling and combat sports businesses in the last few
Oh my
weeks.
God, to say the least.
Seriously. Of course, it had to happen like right in the middle of I was taking time off, but thank you so much for joining me to break it down today. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh yeah, anytime. Yeah.
So I thought when I first saw you report what the nature of that Endeavor deal might be, that it was a no-brainer, that it would increase value of WWE, and also for me, it was like they wouldn't be owned by the Saudi government. Was who was in the deal? Was it a surprise to you that they ended up with Endeavor and UFC?
I mean, only because Ari Emanuel kept saying that they weren't going to get it because they didn't want to increase debt. And I mean, it was a sleight of hand in the sense that no, they didn't buy it. They created a company and merged. So they spent no money and increased no debt while gaining the majority interest in the company. So, yeah, it was a surprise to me only because of what Ariel Emanuel had said, several times, that it's a great company, but we're not interested in buying, which was a sleight of hand because they were working on a deal which didn't include buying it.
Yeah, as soon as I saw it in the Observer, the way that you noted it, that it would split off into its own separate company, I said, "Well, I think that's it." I didn't know that it was going to happen that fast, but I guess with the nature of the way media works, it should have been natural to see it happen right at the end of WrestleMania. That yep, they're going to position this to get the right amount of, media interest in it and stuff like that after a huge WrestleMania. Also,
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, I mean, I think that was fortuitous timing in the sense that the deal really did come together in the last couple of weeks. Really the last 2 weeks. There and Liberty Media was also involved. In some serious bidding for it, and I think that they probably wanted to finalize it so it could be that week, but in some ways that was also kind of a coincidence, in the sense that it wasn't like they had a deal like a month ago and it's like, hey, we're going to announce it WrestleMania week. It was like they had a deal and they were working on it, and then it was just like, okay, we'll go with it, WrestleMania week because the timing worked out.
yeah. What do you think will be the biggest effects on WWE in the upcoming merger, and what's kind of the feeling over there right now?
Well, I mean, from following, obviously, Endeavor took over UFC in 2016, and I remember that very well. And I mean, as far as the product itself goes, I don't expect for the fans to notice a big difference at all. I think that from an office standpoint, it will be huge because there's going to be a lot of layoffs and things like that, and there'll be people who will, I mean, that's what happened with UFC. Lots and lots of people were laid off. It will be run more and more and more for high profitability, and there'll be office restructuring. There will be people who, Vince McMahon may have wanted to always take care of, that he would not have the power to do that, like he would have had before. I mean, the big examples I can give in UFC is Chuck Liddell and Matt Hughes were told, when they retired, they had jobs for life. And as soon as the company was sold, they no longer had jobs there because those promises were made by Lorenzo Fertitta and Dana White, and they were no longer in control of that aspect of the business.
Yeah, pretty much anytime you see a merger, especially with publicly traded companies, it's almost natural that the cuts are going to happen. It happens literally all the time. So
yeah. So I mean, if I was working for WWE, I would be in the front office. I would be nervous, especially if it's the kind of a job that somebody from UFC could do with both. There's certain departments where you could use those departments and and kind of consolidate those departments in certain ways. And that will benefit both companies in the sense of making deals and opening up deals and making connections and things like that. If one company had a good connection or another company had a good connection, both companies in theory would have that good connection, or, to like foreign governments or for television stations, across the board. Plus you got Ari Emanuel with his connections as well. So, I mean, I think from that standpoint, as far as, business dealings, I think that there will be more for both companies. Like the Saudi deal or the Abu Dhabi deal, or shows in foreign markets that are paid for, like the WWE deal in Puerto Rico. I think we'll be seeing more and more of those, like used to happen with, and still does with boxing, where the city is going to pay them to come as opposed to them putting up all, taking all the risk and promoting shows in markets more and more, especially for the big shows.
What about the wrestlers? Because it seems like with this deal that, WWE will have the ability to, they already do have the ability to pay them probably more than anybody else in the market. But, now it should be probably even more that they can pretty much have whoever they want. But at the same time, it's just going to matter like who are they looking at? Like, do the wrestlers have things to be worried about as a merger is going on too in terms of cuts?
Um, I think a marginal wrestler, maybe. I don't expect a lot of talent cuts, and certainly not. I don't think that you're going to be seeing like, say, the big names get cut because of high salaries, which could happen in another business. I don't expect that. I think for wrestling stars, top stars, I would say no. Marginal, it's possible. I think that remains to be seen. But I don't see them having, like it's the same I would say in UFC. In UFC, it's not like, the top guys are not getting paid appreciably better, but they are getting paid better. As revenues go up, I think that you'll see salaries go up, but probably not to the same degree as revenues, because they're going to want to keep, the whole thing is to build this profit margin and lower. But the thing with the WWE talent is that most talent is not unhappy with what they're making, which is not the same as UFC, where almost everyone is.
Right.
It's like they look at it like, what could I make somewhere else? Whereas UFC talent will looks at it, because they're doing real fighting, and going like, look at what boxers make that bring in the same amount of revenue. We're so underpaid. So I don't see, it remains to be seen, but I don't think that's going to be a big thing for the name wrestlers. As far as, will this new company want as many people in developmental as they were having? That's a possibility. Like for the marginal guys, yes, it could mean something, but we don't know yet.
What about UFC? I mean, were there any obvious changes to you when Endeavor took over UFC that were immediately impacting the business outside of, like, you mentioned Chuck Liddell and Matt Hughes and some other, Joe Silva? I know you'd mentioned before, ended up out of the company, but were there any other big obvious changes as Endeavor took over that?
Well, with Joe, it was his own decision to leave.
Oh, okay.
But as far as there were a lot of executives that were let go. I mean, as far as from a fan standpoint, I didn't notice a difference going to UFC or following UFC afterwards. But as far as people who I know in the company that were let go, yeah, I knew a lot of people that were let go, and so I presume it's going to end up the same way with WWE.
In what ways, I was trying to look at this from a couple of different angles. In what ways can WWE help UFC? What do they do well that might translate well to what UFC is doing?
I don't think from a product standpoint we're going to see a change in UFC, but I do think that again, I think that there are probably doors in certain business things that WWE has opened that now will be open to UFC. And again, like, whether it's contacts with foreign promoters or merchandise distributors around the world, or television stations that they have deals with that maybe UFC can jump in and try to get deals with as well. So that's where I would see it. Not in the like in the presentation of the product. I don't see UFC changing the presentation of their product at all based on this merger. But business wise, I expect business business benefits for both sides.
Yeah, kind of the promotions and, in just the partnerships too. Like,
Yeah.
would that be something that you think UFC could probably really help WWE on?
I mean, it's the idea in the sense that UFC has done better with sponsorships than WWE. I think that I think so.
I kind of think that the production and the production values of WWE are something people always kind of knock now. You always see the thing about the shaking cameras and everything like that when people criticize it. But production is something that WWE has always been so many steps ahead on, through the history. That's kind of how they built their company, was always putting money back into production.
Yes.
So I would think there's got to be some aspect of that if from at least I want to pick your brain about why you do this or why you do that could benefit UFC in some ways, to kind of look at the WWE production model a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, minor things, but I mean, I don't think UFC doesn't want to look like WWE.
Right. You want one to look like sports and one to look like
Right,
pro
right,
wrestling.
right. But could people give tips back and forth? Of course, yeah,
Yeah.
and it makes it much easier. Sure.
Who do you see as the most important person to this on the WWE side of things, and why?
In what sense? You mean like Vince McMahon, who's number one? I mean, in the hierarchy. So I guess Vince McMahon, yeah.
So he then, amazingly, after everything that's happened, he ends up basically being pretty much in charge, but not totally in charge. I mean, it's just the way that it seems to be structured now, right?
I mean, he's in power and he's going to stay in power, but he's not autonomous, or anything like that. And he can be replaced. I mean, the thing is, I mean, in the contract, they can replace him, and he would not have the power to bully his way back in like he did the last time. But I don't think that they're looking at replacing him, because look, it's like, is anything going to come out worse than the Rita Chatterton thing? You know what I mean? I mean, that's as bad as it gets, and he's already
Yeah.
there. So I mean, whatever happens next, like with Dana, it's like, they're, I don't want to say untouchable, because there's always things that could get them, but the leniency on both of those guys is really high. So I mean, it just seems like Ari Emanuel just wants Dana and Vince in those positions, and he's willing to, just say like, whatever, I mean, I'm not gonna, whatever happened, and we're not worrying about it.
I just kind of thought with this, it's like, if all of this stuff has already come out about McMahon, and there's been so much of it that, it's natural that there's probably more out there, and not having him, like you said, he can't get himself back on if they ended up getting rid of him. So
Yeah.
do you see any scenario where he finds his way out, or do you think he wants to slow down at all? Because that's the other thing too. It seems like he's sort of back and sort of not at the same time.
He's not as back as he was like 8 months ago, where he was really running creative and everything. And I mean, like, look, time will tell. I think that, number one, most people are happier with the creative, with him out of it. And also the creative is more successful than it was when he was there.
Right.
So, I mean, the numbers back that up. You can just look at the numbers, the arena gates, and just the viewership of the different big shows and the ratings and everything. They're all up since Vince is gone. So, if you're, Ari Emanuel, you don't want to change what is going up or what is at a higher level. But will Vince be there, and help make decisions as far as who the world champion is? Of course he's going to do that. But I see it as, I don't see Vince like changing, things, minor things. But as far as having input on big things, he's always going to, and again, because, and look, the guy's his son-in-law. He's going to give him advice, and the guy's going to take the advice, and ultimately, Vince does have the power.
Yeah. I think at least the fact that it's his son-in-law, you would hope that he'd have a little bit better relationship than he's maybe had with other people in similar type roles. But he's never really had this dynamic before. But he has worked really well as an editor for good idea people in the past too. If you look at like Vince Russo, had the way that him and Vince Russo's dynamic worked.
Yeah. But this is a completely different thing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not, Triple H is not a guy throwing out a whole bunch of crazy ideas and like you pick 3 good ones of them. I mean, Triple H is pretty nuts and bolts when it comes to wrestling. I mean, I don't watch it and go like, oh God, this is ridiculous. I mean, he's really solidified it. I think he's done a great job, especially with you get that 3-hour Monday show, which is so hard to keep interest for 3 hours. It's just too long, but he's done about as good a job as you're going to do.
And it's been creatively and financially successful. Year over year, you like you said, you look at the numbers and it's doing well. So there's no reason to make a change. And it's probably also kind of brought him back to where he maybe wasn't with the way that NXT performed against AEW previously too.
Yeah. It's definitely resurrected his his booking reputation because and it was again the NXT AEW thing. There's a million factors that went into that, but this one, where AEW had certain advantages, and now WWE has the certain advantages, and they're pulling away, and AEW is trying to rebuild. I mean, AEW's got a lot of big stuff coming up this summer, a lot of big things that are probably major changes, and so right now where they are right now doesn't really, it's not necessarily indicative of what's going to be in the fall. But in the fall, I think that we'll see if they're up or down or in the middle or whatever. But WWE is still on the ascent. I mean, they had a really strong WrestleMania, and the numbers, TV numbers are strong, the arena numbers are strong.
Do you think if the rights fees for WWE are, do you think that's going to impact what ends up happening with AEW with theirs in any way? I'm trying to come up with what the impacts exactly on this would be for AEW.
It's hard because, I mean, with WBD and everything being in that weird state too. I mean, in theory, if WWE gets double what they're getting, AEW can go look at this and go like, hey, we're look at what the going rate is for wrestling, and look at it in that way. I don't think it hurts AEW. If it was a situation where AEW is being bid on by, rights fees are being bid on by a bunch of people, I think it would help them. The higher the WWE rights fees, it kind of gives wrestling a certain level and go like, hey, we're the number 2 wrestling, and we can give you maybe not as bigger ratings, but we can give you big ratings for much less cost. And if you want to get into the wrestling game, we're a good option. But if, WBD and AEW are very closely tied. So I don't know if you're going to get that bidding war coming up in whether it's this year or next year, to where you can really balloon those numbers based on playing one side against the other, which WWE is able to do.
It's crazy just with these two gigantic corporate mergers both happening within a 2-year span, how much impact it has on everybody.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking of, I know Tony Khan was getting so upset about, basically being run competition against him on pretty much every weekend that he was picking. But now, if and when this goes through, WWE and UFC can work together and strategize to make sure that there's shows every weekend that AEW.
If AEW gets a Saturday night show, they're going to go against UFC almost every single Saturday night.
Right.
I mean, so, and when it comes to big shows, I mean, I don't see UFC changing its schedule to go against AEW and give them competition. WWE, obviously they've been doing that lately, and Ari will make a decision whether they continue to do that or not. That will probably be, fall into his parameters. So I don't know what his mentality will be on that. But yeah, right now, obviously they put the NXT show head to head with the next AEW pay-per-view. That's not a coincidence.
Yeah. What's good about all of it, though, too, the way that, for the actual products, like they're both pushing each other so much to be good, and both shows are, giving us great matches pretty much whenever we want them. I mean,
we're getting a lot of great matches on television. Yeah.
I mean, WrestleMania, just the percentage of great. I think you noted that in last week's Observer. It was just the percentage of great matches. It was unprecedented, almost, for WrestleMania.
Yeah. I think so. I think we had some of the best matches in WrestleMania history on those 2 days. And the first show was, I think, maybe the best WrestleMania show. The second night wasn't far behind. So yeah, I mean, WrestleMania was a gigantic success in the ring, gigantic success business-wise, real high for the company.
Is AEW booking too many shows, or does that even matter right now with what the demand for content is?
I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to Friday if they go and get the Saturday show, which it looks like they're going to get. 3 shows a week plus Ring of Honor. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to consume, but it's like whatever they get on television and get paid for, it's similar to WWE. It's like that's what the business is, and
it's worth it if you
it's worth it if you're getting paid. It's like the third hour of Raw. It's like, look, they're getting whatever it would be. If you figure it out, like $90 million a year for that third hour of Raw. Yeah, is it too much? Of course it is. We all know it is, but that $90 million a year just domestically, let alone, adding in overseas numbers that you're getting for it. It's like, it's just the nature of where the business is going. The business is going to be about generating content and selling content to television stations that are more and more desperate for things that will draw, a decent number. You don't have to draw the numbers that you were drawn 10 years ago. Nobody's expecting them. And wrestling is better than most at holding its numbers for year on year. So we'll be seeing, I expect that we'll be seeing more and more content from everyone. And it'd be harder and harder to keep up for the fans, which hurts. But and sometimes you go like, well, if you run off the fans in the long run, it's not a good thing. But so far, those rights increases by keep going up make a lot more difference than the the money that you lose by perhaps having a lower fan base and a lower number of hardcore fans because they can't keep up with everything.
Yeah, and I remember the last time we talked, it was around the time of the initial McMahon allegations. That was when I called you for this the first time, and you had mentioned at the time you thought WWE should sell to NBC Universal. So much has
Yes.
changed since then.
I still think that Comcast, if Comcast thought this was a long-term play, I mean, it would be so valuable for them to buy it. But they were not even in the serious discussions to buy it. So whatever that means for them, from what they think of long-term, what the USA Network is long-term. Like if everything was staying the same, they should have bought this thing.
Yeah,
But obviously they think that lots is changing and it was not worth it to buy this thing because but now to keep it, these rights fees are going to go up and up and up and up. But maybe they're thinking that, hey, it's going to take let's say 10 years to make it worthwhile. Maybe they're sitting there going like, in 10 years, is it going to be a USA Network? Are we going to be paying this kind of money for this? Or is it just going to be, is things going to change so much that it's just not worth it? And obviously that's the call that they made.
yeah. It's interesting that so many of those, carriers, NBC and the, other streaming places like that, kind of just they seem to be backing off from, owning their own content in some cases. And
And
it's
this is great content to own, So because it's not just the TV, but it's the library and the history and everything like that. But I mean, for whatever reason, it was not something that they wanted to own bad enough because they were the most logical, and Fox was logical too. I mean, Fox could have added Raw to the schedule, and Raw would do better than Fox programming on Monday. But again, the uncertainty about the future of television versus streaming, probably made that purchase less of a given than had there been no uncertainty at all, like if we were a few years ago. But from a WWE standpoint, I think that the growth of streaming in their minds gives them more leverage to get a bigger television deal. And that hurts those networks trying to keep the programming.
And I think they had some early lessons on streaming too, because they were in the over the top game so early.
Yes.
So they got to firsthand see how hard it is and then see how much they could benefit from it once they made the big deal with Peacock to see.
That was a fantastic the Peacock deal was a fantastic deal. Yeah, for them.
Is Nick Khan the most important hire WWE's ever made on the business side of things?
Yes, I would say so.
It's about $3 billion between the three deals that he negotiated.
I mean, between these deals and everything, and the growth of the company, I mean, like that. You could maybe say some of the guys in the early days of the company in getting it, national and things like that. But I mean, as far as once the company was mature and national, Nick Khan definitely. I mean, he's generated so much money for them, and yes, I would say that without reservation.
And do you see any dynamic at all between Vince McMahon and Dana White that might emerge out of any of this? Are they going to have to work together at all? Does Vince have any oversight over Dana? Or
I mean, in theory, when you look at like he's the chairman of the board of the company that is running UFC, but I think Dana and Vince, there's a respect from there to a degree, and I see Vince staying out of the UFC business. So I mean, in theory, I mean, if Vince had I don't see Vince dabbling in UFC, so I don't see anything there. And Dana's not going to say anything bad about Vince, and Vince isn't going to say anything bad about Dana. I don't think, I mean, they are hotheads, especially Dana. So you never know, but I don't think, I don't see, again, they're interesting characters, and I mean, they're both could blow up, you know what I mean? But I don't see them blowing up at each other just because I don't see them, Dana's definitely not going to do anything when it comes to the pro wrestling business. He ain't going to touch it at all. And Vince, I don't think is going to touch the UFC business. So the odds of them, butting heads are slim.
The other thing I was thinking about, WWE taking such broad strokes on talent recruiting with the NIL and scouting other sports and colleges and all these college visits and stuff that they've done, stuff like that. Could you see a scenario where the fighters who might be struggling in UFC might get a path to try something else if they check the right boxes for WWE?
They can already do that now. But I mean, as far as I don't see this making it necessarily easier. What I see to be easier is if there's like a guy like a Conor McGregor who becomes a huge UFC star and WWE wants to put him on a SummerSlam or a WrestleMania. I see that path being much easier now than it would have been in the past. But as far as like, say, yeah, a UFC fighter who thinks that they can go to WWE, yeah, I mean, it could be a little easier, but I don't see that process changing too much because, WWE has recruited MMA fighters that are interested in the past. Not a lot, but, if they have the right look and they have the right size and everything like that, I think WWE likes the idea of their wrestlers being, athletic with an athletic background, obviously based on who they're scouting and recruiting. So it could be a little bit easier, I don't see, from a wrestling standpoint, I don't see wrestlers wanting to go to UFC, from WWE, maybe a developmental guy. I mean, I suppose a Gable Steveson, but he could go anyway.
Yeah. What about Logan Paul?
If Logan Paul wants to do UFC, he'll probably get it, it'd be a tough one. But I wouldn't rule out the possibility of that happening. If he wants to do it, he has a wrestling background, a little bit of a boxing background. If that's what he wants, he's, but I don't know that this makes it easier, but
he can call his own shots. He can call his own number,
Right.
And probably negotiate his own number also.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to something we call the 3 count now. It's going to be 3 relatively quick questions and your answers. So the first one, aside from Vince McMahon, in your opinion, who has or had the best mustache in pro wrestling?
Oh, geez. Man, Baron Leone or somebody, or Dutch Mantel. I don't know.
Those are both pretty good ones. Second question, what's the best first time ever main event match left in wrestling now that hasn't happened yet?
Oh boy. That's a hard one right now because we just did man, let me think about this one. Because we just did Omega and Vikingo, which would have been pretty high on my list. Oh man. That's really a hard question. Bryan Danielson and Will Ospreay. How's that?
Ooh, yeah, that would be really good. Where my mind goes on those is like, you obviously everybody's going to be talking about Omega and the Bucks and where they're going and what they're doing in the future. But my goodness, you could probably print money if you had Roman Reigns against Kenny Omega.
Yeah, in a different way if Kenny Omega went over there. Yeah. I mean, that would be a big one for sure. Yeah.
I'd add the tag teams in that too. If you were ever able to do Roman Reigns and the Usos versus Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks in the trios.
I mean, that's real big, but it'd be real big for WWE. Sure. I mean, one of the things that we learned with Cody Rhodes is that stuff, if anything, someone from AEW that's at the top level jumping over, it's not like those fans aren't going to know who he is and they're not going to, or they're going to be mad at him for being AEW. If anything, it shows that those kind of jumps, at least right now, are probably would be super valuable to WWE, just as going in the other direction. I think jumps would be super valuable to AEW.
And hopefully, the wrestlers get the best deal out of it, because
well, wrestlers right now that there's contracts are due, if they're top guys, they're in a really good position right now, the best position they've been in since the WCW days, because you've got two companies and they're both willing to pay a lot of money, and I'm presuming with AEW adding television that means they're getting more money from television. With more money they have to do that then Tony Khan has more money to spend on talent. and WWE has ridiculous amount of money to spend on talent if they want. So yeah, it's a good time to be a top guy and have your contract run out. Some guys will probably just stay with their company, but I think that the smart thing to do is let your contract go, or make sure you get a great deal to sign, because the open market it can be a really good place. If you are a top guy in demand, the open market will be a great place for a wrestler coming up, I think.
I'll say that I think I'm in the minority on this among fans, but I actually did agree with Roman beating Cody at WrestleMania. So just because I thought that Superman shouldn't beat Roman Reigns to end that title reign. I think as a good protagonist, you need some more obstacles to get. Like, just maybe I'm viewing him too much as Dusty Rhodes, as that style of a babyface, but like him being undefeated to me was like, that's not how you beat Roman Reigns. I want to see him overcome some things first and then beat Roman Reigns.
Time will tell. I don't have a closed mind on this one at all. It's like, I thought the time was right to do it, but if they can create a better time to do it even more effectively, I mean, the impetus is on them. I mean, they basically said that. It's like, okay, now you said this, now you got to tell the story. You got to tell the story to make it even bigger. And it's not impossible, but I think it's difficult.
And there's so many big shows and stadiums and everything coming up soon too. That was my other thought. It was like you can recreate at least the size almost.
Well, you can create a stadium show, and absolutely. And you can, if you have nothing else for next year's WrestleMania, you can create it next year's WrestleMania. The question is, can you keep the heat for another year? And to where it's just as big, and that's keeping something going for a year is not impossible, but it's very difficult.
Yeah. Injuries, commitment, everything.
Yeah. For a lot of reasons. Yeah.
And then last question, what do you remember best about the first wrestling card you ever attended?
It's in 1971. I mean, I remember it was wild and I had a really good time. It was Pat Patterson and Superstar Billy Graham and Paul DeMarco against Ray Stevens, Peter Maivia, and Rocky Johnson. And I believe Tony Parisi and Mighty Brutus, who was later Bugsy McGraw. And God, I don't remember what the opener was. But it was a 3-match show, and the main event was 2 out of 3 falls and really wild. And, it made me want to go back. I remember that. And it was, I had a great time at the first show I ever went to.
What venue was that?
San Jose Civic Auditorium.
Very, very nice. My first show ever was in September of '88 at the Nassau Coliseum.
Oh, wow.
So November of '88. I'm sorry. So it was Warrior versus Honky Tonk Man, the rematch.
Wow.
And the Brother Love Show live.
Yeah. I'll bet you my main event was better than yours.
Yeah. There were some fun little hidden gems on mine, though. I've looked back at the card. I think the first match I ever saw was actually Owen Hart as the Blue Blazer against what was it? It was probably Danny Davis or somebody like that.
Yeah.
But they also had like singles matches with the Hart Foundation against the Rougeaus. I mean, I was what was I? 8, 7. I was 7.
Wow.
So Dave, thank you so much for joining me today on Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations. I always enjoy catching up with you, and everybody should check out the Wrestling Observer newsletter and F4W online. There's nothing better out there for information.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.